gue udah kirim ke lo ya. Mau pre-war apa tadi gue buat video ya buat formalin. Jangan apa namanya itu kita cetak kalau udah selesai. Ntar bareng yang lain. Apa gue ya? Dia buat formalin. Dan kita cetak kalau udah selesai. Zoomnya di mute aja. Kayak ini tuh harus kita ini manfaat. Baru sering tes sering kelupaan. Iya, no. Terus berarti nyala terus. Cek.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, so thank you for coming. Today we are from IBER, the Indonesian Bureau of Economic Research. Here with us is Buhera, one of the chair of the IBER. We also have like the board of the IBER. There are consists of Lisa. Did you know that Lisa, the lecturer at the Department of Economics also, but unfortunately she cannot come. And also we also have Bu Putugeni here in our team. And let me introduce myself. My name is Chania, and we also here with the team. There is Devina here. Hi, say hello to Devina. She's also the senior from the Department of Economics, the graduate. Yeah, just stay with us lah. Okay, it's also like our team, Miss Doris. Please come, please come. Yeah. Okay. So today, without further ado, I want to introduce our we can say it's like annual project or events. So we either collaborate with CID or Center of International Development. Is it true or not? It's right. It's from Harvard. Did you know where is Harvard? Yeah, it's somewhere in the United States of America. Of course, so it's international place. Um, it's been started since 2019. The collaboration is it true? Oh, 18, 2018. So maybe it's already 18, 19, 20. Almost 10 years. Almost 10 years, yeah, that's true. So this is a 10 years collaboration with IBER and CID. And this year, we are arranged mostly at UI, the activity, because all of the interns here, who's already introduced before, there is Katya, Mira, and Leticia, being supervised by 3 lecturers at the Department of Economics. The first one is Mulisa. Mulisa Shapiro Lisa Munira is supervise our friend from Harvard. Her name is Leticia. The second teacher, hi. And then, hi, thank you, I like that. And then the second one, Ibu Titisari, Bu Titisari will go, the head of program study at the Department of Economics for undergraduate. She supervised our friends here. It's Katia. Hi, Katia. And then, last but not least, okay, it's good. It's going die. Died. Oh no. Oh yeah, the bunch is empty. But yeah. Coba mau pakai satu lagi kan? Kamu taruh kami dulu. Sorry ya. Thank you. Sometimes I have. Okay, so the last but not least, our lecturer at the Department of Economics, his name is Mr. Henry. He will come in a few minutes. He supervised our friends from US also. Our friend is Miri. Hi Miri. Okay. So 3 of them, the beautiful results, today wants to present anything that's been found around more or last 2 months. Is it true? 2 months or 3 months? 2 months. It's not very enough. Okay, so the supervisor, they are going to present what they found in the 2 months. It's kind of independent research. So for those who see the end of the program of the Department of Economics, you will gonna make a thesis for it. This kind of mini thesis is only just 2 months. Most of them doing a qualitative, but also quantitative. So we can say it's mixed methods. It's not a final research, but at least they found something that interesting in their own area. You are lucky, guys, because 3 of them doing a different type of research. For example, if I'm not mistaken, Tisha is doing a health research. Mira is doing a labor, and also Katya doing it's more or less kind of interdimensional development from physical perspective and also structural, industrial structural transformation. Is it right? It's really hard for me, but you're doing great, guys. And then you will listen from their perspective. I really want you to all of the guests here to do like a mini comment for them. Please welcome also Mr. Harvey. Good afternoon. Pak, boleh ibu beri tempat Pak sama ibu. Okay. So yeah, because everyone's already here, we're going to start the event. Oh, anyway, so during 2 months, we also want to say thank you for our people because in the informal time, they are going to Bogor, they are going to where else? Loker? What else? Loker, Bogor, Kota Tua? Yeah, so thank you so much for your help for the intercultural exchange directly and indirectly. On behalf of IBER, we really love to support everything that you have done. And also, we also want to say thank you for all the help from all the supervisor, the Department of Economics, that already provide us a good place to present today. Okay, without further ado, that's all for company. Now we want to listen opening remark from the IBER part. I want to let Buhera to have a short speech for us. The time and floor is for Buhera. Have a short floor. Así que también no Iya Bu, karena belum. Halo Bu.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, sir. So, on behalf of IBER and also Ibu Bangmira, as the director of IBER, I would like to welcome all of you today in today farewell session of CID at Harvard University, the SHIFT program. So, over the past several weeks, our students have had a chance to experience Indonesia, not only for research, but also meeting researchers, I think private institution, and also the policy making, and then you also come to join the conferences and also getting to know the students from Canada. So we hope that this experience has given you a better understanding about the Indonesia opportunity and challenges, and also as well as our culture and the life. Just a little bit. I also understand that you also went to Lampung and went to Bali, and I think you will have this experience, our culture. So one of the highlights of the program is the opportunity, to meet our IBER advisor, especially the one school and also part of the president. There are both the have a distinguished position as the academician, and also both of them also was a minister in their area, and also in past in the Ministry of Finance and many different things. So I think I hope that this experience also have added the valuable dimension in your internship. Really, when we joined the ISPA conference in London. So I hope that will be so today is your opportunity to share what we have learned, and your study, your research, and reflect your Indonesia. We are excited to hear your stories and perspective, because international exchange is always a two-way learning experience. We also learn from you, maybe as much as you learn from us. Okay. And I'd like to thank you, our supervisor, Pak Henry, and then also Lisa and who it is, can come. And the organizing committee, Tanya, Devina, Gelis, and also Niki, who help make the program possible, and also for students from Canopy. Thank you very much for your help, for your time, and your support, and your hospitality to make this experience meaningful for the intern. And for the interns, thank you, and for spending part of your time with us. Okay, we hope that you live in Indonesia with new knowledge, and new friendship, and good memories, of course. And we look forward to welcoming you back welcoming you back to Indonesia or to IBER in the future. But I think that's all. Kalian. Once again, thank you, and I hope everyone enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Vera, for the opening remarks. And now we're going to jump into the third supervisor who's coming today, Mr. Fadli. Just give some remarks for us with this activity. Mr. Fadli, we have a place it for you. Time is yours. Just give a applause to Mr. Fadli. Please, Bob.
So I really wasn't expecting to give a speech this yeah this afternoon, but yeah again thank you all Kania Tina for inviting me to this final event of peace of the ladies here, and thank you to Hera for the opportunity to be connected with Mirai in particular for me at this event. And congratulations for either team and specifically for three of you to accomplish your internship program in FFP. Particularly for me, I'm sorry for being very non-responsive supervisor during your time here, but I believe you manage your work here. And
Sorry. No, it's from the other mic.
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, just echoing what Ibu Hera said, I hope not only Mirai, also Katia and Tisha, right? You managed to make friendship with with our colleague here. I believe these are our undergrad students, right? You guys are S1, right? Correct. Yeah, okay. I hope you managed to have a good connection with Harvard students here. So we have like a very good network, networking. It's going to be very short speech because I didn't prepare anything. I hope, did you manage to go to Bali last weekend?
Yeah.
So yeah, did you like it?
Yeah.
Oh, finally, yeah. So you started in Lampung and then go to Bogor, and then you closed everything in Bali. So I hope you made a good memory while you're in Indonesia. All the best for your next endeavor. Mirai, I'm waiting for your the draft for the brief. You will leave your legacy here in Indonesia in a very written manner. So looking forward to. Thank you, Mirai, for your effort. And again, Bu Hera and I team, thank you very much for the opportunity, and then looking forward to hearing your presentations, maybe online. Thank you, and have a good discussion in the presentation. Selamat. What time is it? Good afternoon, selamat siang, selamat malam.
Thank you so much for having me. All right. Okay. So before we start our presentation today, we would like to invite first is Mas Handri as a representative of a supervisor to get a certificate from us from IBER, and then Hera will represent our IBER team to give this. Mas Handri boleh maju ke depan, dan also Bu Hera. Hari ini boleh minta tolong. Oh, okay. Okay. Difotokan. Okay, so this is like symbolic for the supervisor. How to say activities. All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you, Mas Aldi. Mas Aldi jangan mundur dulu karena abis ini kita mau foto bareng. Tapi afterward, maybe you can sit there with the thank you, please. And then we would like to give some souvenir from us to the three of you. So Isha, Mira, and Kalian, come to the front. And then we would like to invite again Hannah to give the gift from us. Oh, it was like very good. So one by one, yeah. So from Tisha, you know, sorry, what are you short for? Wait a minute, I'll take a picture for you. Is it your phone?
Yes, this is mine.
Is it yours? No, I have my phone. It's okay, kalau punya pacar. Boleh di depan lagi, Bu, kau One, two, three, this is for Kasia. And last but not least for me, really. So we had to put you please like stand up there beside Tisha, and then we will have to take a picture. But you also invite you, sorry, I'm waiting. Alright. 1, 2, and 3. One more time. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, thank you so much. Alright. Before that, we want to take a picture together. So maybe you can stand in here, finally, and then all of the audience, would you please stand up? We'll take a picture together here. Maybe here, so me, and then I can take from here. Yeah, just move forward. Yuk, yang di belakang maju. Bapak di sini, Pak. Ibu di belakang ini, Ibu. Mbak, please boleh kita follow, Mbak. Oh ya, apa ini perlu kita putar? Kelihatan yang di belakang.
Kelihatan, Bu.
Kelihatannya maju. Oke, Pak. Oh, kita ini enggak, maaf. Di putar dulu. Foto kameranya.
Oh,
Nah. Ada. Sedih banget ya kamu gitu. Ya udah. Ini kameranya yang ini ternyata. Sorry. Nah. Nggak mau waktu di YouTube.
Satu, 2, 3. Saya lagi. 1, 2, 3. Oke.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so now we're coming to the main agenda. So now we're coming to the main agenda. Okay. All right, nice. First, we're gonna have a first presenter. Her name is Katia. I think we can have like more or less 50 to 20 minutes to present. And afterward, we will have like, for example, maximum 10 minutes to have an open discussion. And if Butilis is coming, maybe she can give a note. And then, yeah, and afterward, we will move to the dynamic scenario. Okay, Katia, time is yours. Let's give a applause to Katia. Yang itu kan biasanya udah kelihatan nggak di itu. Udah kelihatan ya? Tidak ada di itu kan? Oke. Ayo sedikit lagi. Sorry, for you anyway. I don't think we can help also then. Sorry. Yeah, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce a bit my topic. So basically, when I came to Indonesia, I thought that I'd do something that was really related to fiscal inclusion, financial inclusion, because that's something that I've worked on before. But I ended up discovering something different that I didn't think I would. And I learned a lot more about structural transformation. And you'll see why I thought this topic was interesting. I'll provide a bunch of evidence at first before I introduce my research questions and then some preliminary facts. All right, this is the outline, just like I said. So basically, I think I'd like to start off with where Indonesia was before this century and how the economy looked like. You can see in the annual GDP growth and percentage on the right there, a bunch of hikes, such spikes, and you can see the growth rate fluctuating quite a lot until the Asian financial crisis right there in the late 90s, where you see the really big drop. And after that, if you notice this trend, the economy seems to be stagnating, or at least there's not as many big growth spikes. So I thought that was something that would lead me into understanding better why structural transformation in Indonesia is stagnating, why manufacturing has fallen behind. So you can see that during the oil boom in the 70s, the Indonesian government raised $4.4 billion in government revenue, which helped a lot with many stabilization policies and other such investments. During Suharto's government, there was a lot of government intervention into building capital, into investing in education and rural infrastructure, which follows sort of classical development economic theories. And you can see that labor productivity also reached a pretty high peak at 3.4% when manufacturing employment was 27% of GDP in 1997. But as you can see, since then, manufacturing percentage value added to GDP has gone down since the end of 2005, somewhere along that year. And you can also see that services has gone up. So just as like a bit of context, Indonesia was hit the most severely, I'd say, out of all the Asian countries by the financial crisis, which affected a lot of companies that were manufacturing companies or other companies that had factories in Indonesia. And yeah, basically, a lot of the defaults and banking crises that happened during that time displaced a lot of labor from manufacturing to low productivity sectors and informal economy that I would like to study here. So let's think, okay, if manufacturing has gone down as value added GDP, if we're seeing in some of the data that many people after the financial crisis went into low productivity sectors, what can be the cause of this continuing stagnation post the crisis? Because you'd think that maybe after crisis, the economy could recover, right? Maybe it'll go back to its same sectoral share, but it didn't. So I would like to study the whole commodity movement in the 2000s and maybe see if that could be an explanation for why Indonesia's structural transformation looks the way it looks. You can see that, coal has been quite a big state revenue commodity. It's been the biggest commodity that Indonesia exports. Indonesia is the #1 exporter of coal in the world, surpassing Australia. And I saw, as I was searching for more evidence, that production, it's been going up since then. However, as you'll see later, I'll show that revenue from coal has gone down. The World Bank estimates Indonesia uses much of the commodity price in coal for unproductive spending, especially universal fuel sources. So if Indonesia is using a lot of revenue in full from coal for kind of non-productive investments and other spending, then that may be the cause for why structural transformation looks the way it is. We shall investigate. So some of the literature says that if you look at Indonesia's post-1999 revenue sharing reform, the DCH, and compare districts that receive natural resource windfalls with nearby districts that did not, you would find something that's called a 5-acre effect. So basically, a lot of the new revenue that came in just sort of stuck there and expanded the local budget, instead of actually going into new sectors or going into sort of new spending. Another study shows that resource revenue windfalls increase capital expenditure, infrastructure spending, and public business service expenditure. So that could also be a partial resource blessing explanation here. And then a third one shows that Indonesian local governments devoted on average approximately 36% of natural resource windfalls to education. So if you see a lot of this spending, and some of it is classified as capital, infrastructure, education, why is it that so many people have gone into informal employment, right? Why is it that this spending has not built the capabilities and linkages that we need to see in the economy? I've also attached here some graphs about geographic inequalities, just because that's going to serve to how I build up my research question. Since it's really important to mention the fact that Indonesia is a decentralized governing system, economy, and a lot of the resource sharing revenue that you'll see in my data is going to be disaggregated by province or district. All right. So like I said, maybe there's something here of an explanation from the fiscal composition of these local budgets that could be explaining why certain capabilities are not being built up in the economy. So from the IMF, some of their evidence shows that commodity price increases raises both revenue and expenditure in developing economies, right? So that's something that we saw together in the earlier evidence. And resource-rich countries specifically generates a bit of a pro-cyclical bias driven especially by expenditure. This is somewhat of a problem in countries that are developing like Indonesia because it could lead to a boom bust trap. What is a boom bust trap? It means that you could have these kinds of effects. So like a resource trap where the national revenues, they surge right at first. The government uses those windfalls to expand their expenses. And then when the bust comes, because the bust will always come as a business cycle, then that causes revenue deficits and fiscal corrections, because now the government doesn't have the kind of revenue that happened, right? You can also see crowding out in a lot of the sectors that lose priority when a bust happens. And then structural vulnerability is a sort of a long-term effect. So there are fiscal buffers that usually should be in place. However, they cannot like stabilize on the long term. And so you see during the bust cycles that there's an over borrowing reliance on deficit financing. And for Indonesia specifically, I have found that the IMF analysis between 1993 and 2008 found that fiscal policy was not counter-cyclical. So that means it was pro-cyclical, and that some budget items were pro-cyclical. Right, so obviously there seems to be a dependence on some of these raw commodity exports. It's not necessarily, I don't have here something specific to coal, but mainly it's commodity dependence, right? And basically what happens with the pro-cyclical financing in Indonesia is that it creates common fiscal asymmetries. So there are certain projects that are favorable during the hike, that are very capital intensive. And then on the other side, when there's a bust, there's a lot of cuts, right? And there's a lot of other like expenses that cause the. Okay, so now we have a better understanding of how coal and the export of it and production of it works in Indonesia and how it plays a big part in the economy. We understand a bit of how the fiscal side of Indonesia works when it comes to coal, so it works in pro-cyclical fashion. And now we can get to the structural transformation aspect. So basically what I've gathered from my research is that Indonesia features a growth and transformation paradox. For example, a growth aspect is the fact that there have been 2.1 million jobs per year created in the last about 10 years. And unemployment decline as well pretty significantly, or at least that's what the official data reports. Employment rate reached 64% of the working age population, which is higher than it was previously. Government revenues rose, GDP growth is pretty robust for a developing country. But at the same time, you see these other, transformation problems. So manufacturing employment share, for example, stagnated. It has been stagnating for a while, or even has been declining. The formal sector is failing to absorb surplus informal labor. And informality remains really high at 60% of total employment. So the majority of the working age population in Indonesia works in informal. So what does our classical development theories tell us about a country like Indonesia? It should say that, okay, you have this thing called the manufacturing escalator. The workers from agriculture and other low productive sectors would lead to high productivity, right? And that's in itself like an escalator. It's sort of boosting itself because high productivity sectors already have high technology. They're probably more prone to wanting trade openness and rapid automation. And other stuff like productivity upskilling and service transition. But what's actually happening is, and other evidence from around the world, is that structural change has been growth reducing. So instead of people going into high productivity sectors, they go from low productivity sectors like agriculture into other low productivity sectors like these kind of low skill services. We also see capital intensity in a lot of projects, and that creates stranded labor basically, because as low competition forces, comparative advantages and forces reliance on technology, that means that a lot of labor will be left behind. And we also see projects, famous European industrialization or premature industrialization, which we saw in some of the manufacturing share. Okay, just to basically summarize. So we see that commodity downstreaming does not equal economic development. And I have some evidence here on nickel, just because the coal has not really been studied as much, which is why I think my study, fills a gap in the literature. We see the inclusion gap in informality, right? We see that there's a low official unemployment rate, but at the same time, it takes a long time to find a job. It takes a long time to move from a informal sector to a formal sector. And at the same time, we see GDP growth, but not to the capabilities that Indonesia possesses. There's a Harvard Growth Lab Complexity Outlook Index that in 2019 ranked Indonesia 6th. This is a really high ranking for a developing country. And it had predicted that Indonesia should be able to grow each year at 5.8%. However, this did not happen. It averaged 4.8% in reality. Right, and we see all these creation of jobs, but at the same time, people are not earning more, wages are being depressed. So what's happening here? That's basically this whole setup of my question, why I found this interesting. And I just have here a use case just to understand the informal side as well. So with a Gojek driver, you could see that, or other, some of these smaller platform drivers, you can see that the median age is 30 years old. No, sorry, that's for the population. Most of the Gojek drivers and other drivers like this have quite a lot of education actually, or almost the majority of them. And yeah, they had full-time jobs, but they went into formal labor. So I'm, trying to understand better why this is happening, why this movement is occurring. And my theory is that there's a fiscal composition pressure that basically uses these windfall revenues and prevent structural transformation. Because if the economy isn't using its potential capabilities, but it has those capabilities, if people are going from low productive sectors into other low productive sectors, but at the same time, the government is spending quite a lot on education and rural development, why do we see this happening, right? And I say that it's a three-phase study, although I have not reached any of the other two questions. But yeah, basically, I'd like to see if I can build this study better and work from this question into the next one, and the third one about financial inclusion. Okay, I'm just gonna really quickly go over some theoretical explanations just to have some models in mind. So there could be potentially a multiplier effect here at play. So increased demand for local inputs through local linkages could create these type of boom effects in the local area, only in areas with a lot of resource exposure. So that's something that was found in this study, for example, in Peru. There was a gold mine and it studied basically the evolution of whether there is increased demand for local inputs, and they said yes, there's a multiplier effect here, but only in the region that has that kind of like mining exposure, right? Not in other areas. We can see that in Indonesia, actually, there was also somewhat of a similar study that saw that income is raised as district mining value doubles, but it doesn't change any average income levels, right? This is the thing that I want to see. Why is employment not changing? There could also be an enclave extraction explanation. So, for example, Sandra and Young in their study, they found that labor productivity growth is driven by productivity improvements in sectors, but not reallocation throughout sectors. So their structural change was lower than 1/3 of overall labor productivity. And there's another study that kind of confirms the same. Then there's also Dutch disease, which is a very famous branch of development that basically says that at the national level, you see a lot of these shifts from commodity windfalls as real exchange rate movements. And at the provincial level, you'll see them as local wages, land prices, transfer costs, and competition for workers and inputs. So this is again somewhat related, but only in that region that has the production or manufacturing or mining capabilities. And then there's international price shock that basically says that if you study international commodity shocks, you'll see that domestic labor market is volatile directly from the international price shock. That makes sense with prices going higher, but at the same time, it's also indirectly by income, spending, migration, and exchange. There's also some other growing explanations, like institutional explanations, that basically say that natural resources like coal are more likely to promote growth for institutions for productive activity and are more likely to generate rent-seeking for institutions allow actors to capture resources. So this is about capturing, which could basically explain why all these fiscal composition and expenditures maybe are not working the way we like them to be working, for how development predicts them. And there's another side to this that says that at Indonesia's national economic performance, there's no discernible aggregate improvement, and it questions whether its expected channels operated as theory. So basically, this predicts heterogeneity among equally resource exposed provinces. So how do I want to set up my study? I basically wanted to see whether between provinces that do produce and trade and export coal and provinces that don't, whether there are any differences between them, and to better see if there's an explanation for why all these revenues are not being put to good use. So I have some preliminary findings or relationships here that I've got. So you can see here that from 2005, coal generated unusually large but temporary external windfalls, creating a revenue management issue. So that could be in line with institutional explanations. And then you see here that from 2020, although that's kind of a bit of a period here because of COVID, the coal boom produced a large fiscal windfall, which reached regional budgets with a visible lag. This is in line with procyclicality at the fiscal level. And my third evidence here shows that mining revenue tracked the commodity cycle closely, confirming that the boom materially expanded national fiscal capacity. Over here, you can see that at the regional level, budgets shifted away from personnel so much toward capital, so the capital intensity side. But expenditure categories alone cannot tell us whether investment diversify the economy, right? Because I'd have to disaggregate per what expenses, or if it deepened the resource sectors. And then this graph shows that despite the revenue boom, aggregate real regional spending per person remained broadly flat, suggesting that windfall was delayed or not fully translated into current expenditure. And here some revenue was reflected in higher capital allocation and temporary year-end balances, but the available evidence does not show the creation of a durable stabilization. So all of this evidence together and with the literature tells me that I have to actually test my data and see whether I can find any quantitative causal explanation between revenue windfalls disaggregated by expenditure and composition in the different provinces that I want to explore. In here, so related to this actually, so in coal-rich provinces, we can clearly see here from some of the data from BTS and Sub-Fairness that workers left agriculture primarily for services. So this confirms obviously that the shift here from low productive to low productive, and the structural change in coal provinces was service-led, not manufacturing. What are the next steps for my research? I have to set up a conceptual mechanism and choose one of the explanations or one of the theoretical models that I showed you. Do an identification process to see which variables I will be using to explain or rather use in my test. The setup of the econometric model and the collection of the data. So far, I've thought about it this way. I basically want to use sort of this causal system, thinking that, okay, there's a coal price shock that will go directly into mining activity and fiscal windfall that changes the spending composition, that affects the structural transformation and the bus period adjustment. The only concern here is that there are some interaction terms and some confounding variables, usually. And so I have to actually decompose everything. That's why I have the identification step of this research. So I can separate these stages. And that's why I also have this sort of little model at the bottom that shows that, you know, the coal windfall has to be separated into two separate effects, the direct mining channel and the fiscal channel. Okay, so what's the data that I need? As of now, I have a province level workbook of the 33 provinces that's been harmonized through the 2005 to 2025 years as a proof of concept, but I don't actually have the more disaggregated district data. That would mean actually going through all of the regional governments and their websites and collecting data there. But right, I mean basically these some labor outcomes, coal exposure, international shock, the physical channel, spending composition that I need to separate, and some moderators. So like I said, this is the panel that I already have set up so far, but it's not sufficient for the kind of granular test that I want to do. The econometric methodology so far that I've set up looks kind of like this. I want to do some local projections. And yeah, basically I have to first look at the coal shock at the local level and see how the price affected the local level and move it to the fiscal shock and have a baseline channel model so I can use all of the different variables that I need for my fiscal side. Yeah, and the fiscal channel model. This is, I mean, it's not really, it's kind of rudimentary so far. It's I could probably do better, so if you have any feedback, that would be great. Some limitations that I think come with the study is that yeah, there are some endogenous spending choices. A lot of the data could be confounding. There are some harmonization issues as well, because not a lot of data is collected from the same records. So. Yeah, and at the end here, I just wanted to showcase a bit of what stakeholder activity has sort of modeled my research question and the development of my research. So the Demography Institute here, the Demography and Finance Ministry, the National Economics Council, and a meeting that I had with GoPay of the project group. This is my there. So thank you very much. I hope to see whether I can actually collect more data and test it from my results.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Nadia. This is very interesting topic and also deep research for us, these arguments. Really appreciate it. And okay, without further ado, do you have any suggestion or question, please? So, Katya, does anyone want to have some comments? Maybe, or Brianna, do you want to have some comments first? You first? Oh, please. But please, everyone, please ask or give a suggestion.
Any comments are
Any
welcome.
comments? It's informal, it's okay.
Just a question on like literature. You know what happens in the other outshine countries / this Indonesian experience somewhat similar.
Okay, that's a good question. So from my limited expertise knowledge, Vietnam, for example, is a pretty terrible country based on so Vietnam is a pretty comparable case country for development since it had a pretty similar trajectory in terms of its structural transformation, agriculture to manufacturing, and then had the financial crisis. So pre-financial crisis, they're quite similar. But after the financial crisis is where you see the divergence in GDP growth and in the manufacturing value added. So Vietnam, since the 2000s, has been able to build a comparative advantage that Indonesia just lost, basically manufacturing. And that's why my theory has, I think, some sort of relevant foundation, because if these two countries are similar in terms of how their economies are structured, but not by population, for example, then there must be some sort of problem that's happening in Indonesia based in the regional labor markets, or something about the fiscal spending is not investing in human capital and education and capabilities. So yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I want to definitely explore the regional outlook and see how other trajectories happen, but that's just all I so.
Thank you so much. Okay, maybe is there any question or following up comment? I think from this way, maybe. Do you want to have comment, please?
Thank you for your presentation. So, you basically say that the problem is affecting the maybe structural physical structure in Indonesia. So, and that I can also find that Indonesia both do not follow by the transformation. So, what do you really suggest for the transformation itself? Like, what kind of transformation is needed to make up this problem? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think that I don't know enough yet of what the fiscal side should look like as what the government should be doing. But I think that what the labor market should be should change into is definitely a lot more employment in general. I think that's the first step. I think absorbing people into the formal labor market is, I think, crucial for moving forward, because I don't think there's any way you can skip the step and just move someone from informal labor into a really high productivity or high skill, demanding sector. So I think that first of all, there should be some sort of change in maybe regulations for being more business friendly, being more open to trade. I have also researched a lot about the trade openness, although I didn't really provide any data about that, but even with oil right now, Indonesia has taken some liberty to regulate its trade in a way that is not good for the country, in a way that just creates more limitations. And so I think with more openness to this era of globalization, right, and to maybe foreign investments that have gone down in the past couple of years in Indonesia, trying to regain that momentum is probably going to help with expanding the formal employment on the labor markets. And then after that, the government should probably step in and target more areas that are in development or rural areas in other provinces, not just in Java, where they can educate more people, they can give more benefits. Because if they have the money to do it, then I think probably there's a way to set up a system for that. But that's I'm not an expert in this, it's just an overall perspective that I have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Is there any more comment or questions? None, maybe? No, you want to have? Further on, okay. Does anyone want to have a question? Or comment? Do they have any? Okay, great, please move.
I think you're very satisfied with the listening, so far that's next study, but I just want to ask you that lately I would recommend also want to increase the production of other mining sector. There's anything can affect the pure model because your model is more related to the code itself, yeah, but I think for the first 4 or 5 years, you also the gold and also nickel and also other things. So maybe it will, I don't know, maybe if you want to make your model, you have to give attention to the development of these issues. There's many things, but I don't know, because it's difficult to.
Thank you. I'd love to hear all of your questions maybe afterwards. That's a very important question that I only started considering recently. So yes, you're right. Just because you see, certain coal revenues going into certain places, that doesn't mean that there aren't other sources, right? of revenue.
I think the mining sector is also the specific characteristic or they have more like mostly and also how to do safe. So it can be those.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I can look at palm oil and people, but I think what I found in my preliminary evidence that I thought was interesting in defense of my theory is that if you saw in the coal rich provinces, the structural transformation was still led by services, not by manufacturing. So even though they're receiving through the resource sharing revenue through the DHH, they're receiving the revenue from their coal production, it doesn't seem to translate into the kind of movement or reallocation to higher productivity sectors. It seems to still stagnate just at an overall level in Indonesia everywhere. So I think that was something that I thought was potentially, something to defend my theory. But obviously, yes, I could probably look at other commodities and probably see something similar as well. So I don't know how I can move forward with that, then maybe I need to create a study where I see just at the aggregate level, all the commodity revenue instead of splitting it into separate commodities. I'm not sure, but that's a really important question that can probably break my study pretty easily.
All right, I think the time is almost at for Katya. Katya, thank you so much for all of the feedback and also all the answers about this discussion. We would like to hear some thoughts for Katya. Maybe we can have another informal discussion afterward. You're already doing a great work, so yeah, thank you so much, and we wish good luck for the next research. Thank you so much. Please give applause for your life. Thank you, Katya. Okay, so next, we would like to invite the second presenter. Who's there? Is it Tisha? Oh yeah, alright. Okay, so for the second presentation, will be delivered by Tisha. The time required is yours, and you can also use this, please.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Hi everyone. My research topic is looking at the determinants of vaccine manufacturing responsiveness to pandemic surge demand. And I was supervised by Dr. Lisa. Okay. So just to start, a little bit about me. Hi, my name is Alicia. We kind of went through this before, but I'm originally from Jaipur, India. I will become a second year student at Harvard this September, and I'm studying history and mathematics applied to the economics track. Generally, I'm pretty interested in international development and public health, especially the intersection of both. And on campus, I do a lot of debating, journalism, and with research. Cool. Okay, let's talk about the research now. A bit of context and like giving you a bunch of reasons for why I chose the research question I chose. So, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and by 2023, we realized that 31% of the world's population had not received even one dose of the coronavirus vaccine. And the gap was especially severe outside of high-income countries. And the main reason to explain this seems to be that the vast majority of vaccine manufacturing is centralized and located in high-income countries. We don't have vaccine manufacturers that have the ability to produce vaccines on a scale that is necessary to meet the pandemic demand in the vast majority of even middle-income countries or low-income countries. This, of course, differs regionally. Africa has no major vaccine manufacturer at all. There are some major vaccine manufacturers in Asia, especially in India, Indonesia, and China, but it differs a lot with the region. So, why is understanding the determinants of vaccine manufacturing responsiveness to surge demand very important? Some of this is basic. The faster we're able to produce vaccines, the faster we're able to save more lives. Quite easy. But the second thing is, often what happens is a lot of international organizations and governments face this dilemma where once the pandemic has started and once we have recognized what vaccines can actually help the world, they need to figure out where they need to put their funding. They need to figure out who they want to help with their technology transfers and just generally where they need to direct their resources. And you can't really do that without having an understanding of which facilities are much more likely to produce vaccines on like a large enough scale. And the last thing is to know how to build up vaccine manufacturing. We need to know what helps in building up vaccine manufacturing. I also want to note that a lot of the existing literature is either about clinical research and vaccines, so it's significantly more biology and medicine focused, or it is about vaccine delivery. So what could governments do about getting people to accept vaccines? How do you roll out vaccines, etc.? Not enough research has been done regarding vaccine manufacturing and production. I actually think like Dr. Lisa is one of the world's leading experts on it, since she's one of the very few experts who's actually looking into the topic. So I think there's a huge gap in the research when it comes to this topic. Cool. And there have been some experiences here that have shaped my motivation when looking into this topic further. So the first thing is I was helping in organizing the Building Global Health Resilience in ASEAN conference with Dr. Lisa. And generally what the conversations looked like from the ASEAN perspective was that ASEAN was not well prepared for COVID-19, primarily because there is not enough local or regional vaccine manufacturing capacity in the ASEAN. At this point, there's definitely a recognition of the problem, and there's definitely an understanding from countries that they need to do something about it. Some countries are willing to have financial commitments into this problem, but not enough understanding about how to move forward, which is what further encouraged me to do this research. The second thing that I learned from this conference is just from a political and policy perspective, how Indonesia is viewing global health and vaccine manufacturing, which is primarily that, so the Minister of Health was there at the conference, and what he said is that there's a concern that Indonesia will fall in the middle income trap, and health is often seen as a large way of avoiding the middle income trap and making your workers significantly more productive. Indonesia faces some unique challenges, especially with tropical diseases, which is why local vaccine manufacturing capacity is very important, because these are diseases that not other people in the world experience. And so unless Indonesia is able to manufacture vaccines for them on its own, you won't really get a lot of solutions to these problems. So building vaccine manufacturing capacity is actually incredibly important as a national priority for Indonesia. And we have Biopharma, which is a state-owned enterprise that handles vaccine manufacturing. The second thing was meeting with the Vice Minister of Finance. And the thing the Vice Minister of Finance said is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were quite shocked to hear and to learn that Biopharma actually had the capacity to produce vaccines. They didn't know that Biopharma could be a company that could produce vaccines for the pandemic. And a lot of the early efforts of the government were looking outside of the country rather than inside of the country. And this was incredibly surprising to me because Biopharma is one of the major manufacturers in Asia. It is one of the very few companies that has end-to-end manufacturing capacity, in that it can do the research, it can create the vaccines, and then it can manufacture them on scale to produce them for Indonesia as a whole. So just generally, there's this recognition that we don't really know what vaccine manufacturing capacity looks like, how to measure it, and how to implement this. Cool. So my research question was, what factors make some vaccine manufacturing units much more capable of responding to pandemic surge demand than others? Just some pieces of background here so that the vaccine production process is a little bit clearer. So there's 3 large stages to the vaccine production process. First is the clinical development. And I want to know this is often the stage where you are recognizing how to create the vaccine. This is the research stage, this is the clinical trials stage. So you have your 3-phase clinical trials here. Most of this stage is where the scientists and experts are involved, and that is not what the focus of my research is. The second stage is vaccine manufacturing, and you can divide that into 2 parts. One is bulk manufacturing, which is cell culture, fermentation-based manufacturing, and separation processes. And this is generally about getting together the biological element of the vaccine. So what are we putting in the vaccine? Do we know how to manufacture it? Are we able to create those cells, or are we able to create those pathogens? That's the bulk manufacturing part. And then finishing operations such as filling, packaging, and lot release is using that, transferring that into right amounts in glass vials, being able to package that in ways that they have the correct shelf life to make them, and are able to be transported in the correct amount. And then the last stage is regulatory harmonization and quality checks. I want to note this is a huge stage when it comes to vaccine manufacturing. And the reason why vaccines differ from drugs or just generally any medicines is because vaccines are uniquely administered to healthy people. And as a result, there's a lot of concern about people who are doing they're completely healthy, they're doing very well. Side effects in them is a big concern. Whereas you can't, for instance, if you're administering drugs to patients, you're much more okay with there being side effects to those patients over time you're able to solve for that disease. But because vaccines are inherently prevention focused, regulations become a lot more important, especially because there seems to be increasingly a rise in anti-vaccine ideology. And so unless we have strong regulation and quality checks, it is hard to convince the general population to take vaccines. That's the first part. The second is on the economics of vaccine manufacturing. And this is more from a firm level, what vaccine manufacturing looks like. First is economies of scale. That is to say, vaccine manufacturing has very, very high fixed costs. Like your entire company and your entire factory is and has to be made a very certain way for vaccines to be produced using the specific way you're producing your vaccines. The marginal costs are much lower. As a result, if you're able to produce more vaccines, it is much cheaper for companies and you just generally get more profits. So even from a profit perspective or from what companies would like perspective, increasing capacity of vaccine production seems to be beneficial to them because they're able to save costs because each dose, like each marginal dose produced will like decrease the cost significantly. But the issue with the high fixed costs, however, is that it's incredibly hard to switch between technology for vaccines because your factory equipment is only specific to one technology. What that means is currently a lot of the firms that exist are using technologies that we discovered in the 1980s and 1990s and have not adapted to the current technology that perhaps has more potential to produce vaccine doses, but just it would take so much upfront cost to establish them. It would require so much upskilling of their labor to learn how to use that technology in the first place. The second thing in terms of cost structure is just that at a lower output level, fixed costs are the dominating costs that a vaccine manufacturing firm will have to face. Whereas beyond 20 million doses a year, your variable costs, so your raw materials, for instance, become the primary driver of cost per dose. So kind of the economic analysis that smaller firms face is different from what larger firms face, and your policy has to adapt to that. And lastly, economies of scope. There seems to be a profit incentive and generally an economic benefit to be able to create infrastructure that is able to function within different types of vaccines. Just because that decreases the cost of producing the vaccine even more, just because it's able to play within economies of scale further. However, you kind of need to learn how to navigate that once again with the high upfront fixed costs that exist. Cool. So in terms of methodology for how I conducted my research, there were two parts to it. So first was a structured literature review. I looked at more than 30 plus research papers. The key terms that I searched for included vaccine manufacturing scale-up, capacity building, and pandemic responsiveness. I grouped for research primarily done after 2010, and after identifying what papers I'd be using, I analyzed them using thematic analysis. And then the second thing is qualitative interviews, especially with experts. As of now, I've conducted semi-structured interviews with 2 experts. Because of the way my research is being conducted and generally the constraints that vaccine manufacturing firms face, I have to keep them anonymous. But generally, this is a professional at a developing country, vaccine manufacturer, and a research scientist who also learns and knows how to manufacture vaccines. Cool. This is a framework, and I'll go into each of these factors separately. But the key thing to note is I've identified 4 major factors, and each of those 4 major factors have 3 sub-factors that are measurable. So these are specifically things that you could use existing data that is present in annual reports often, but as the WHO or the government to measure whether or not this capacity exists. I also want to note I have organized them via importance. So just in terms of what's the first thing you should start on, it goes with raw material supply security. So let's look at that. Cool. So access to critical raw materials is the most primary bottleneck in scaling vaccine production during pandemics. There's 3 things you can look for when it comes to raw materials, but in general, what we've discovered is, especially when it comes to developing country vaccine manufacturers, 1, vaccine manufacturing often tends to need raw materials that not many companies will want to produce. So for instance, a kind of bio-based vaccine requires this bark from this tree in Chile that only one company is able to get. So you are able to only source from one company, and that really changes the game when it comes to access to critical raw materials. This often differs depending on what raw material you need. So obviously glass vials is something that more companies produce in the world than specific raw materials. And generally raw materials change according to the type of vaccine you're producing, which is a pretty big problem because we don't know what the next pandemic is going to be caused by. And so in general, if you're thinking of being able to be prepared for pandemics, we need to be able to apply this framework to unknown biological agents that may occur in the future. So there's a couple of things that could help. First is supplier diversification. That is to as much as possible, companies should have networks and contracts with more than one supplier for just the same raw material. And the reason for that is very simple because as soon as the pandemic hits, more than one company is going to be asking the same supplier for products, especially if you're a middle income country or a low income country, you often don't have a comparative advantage in those negotiations. And if you only have a deal with one supplier, it is much more likely that that supplier is going to produce and supply raw materials to larger vaccine manufacturing firms who are often buying in significantly more bulk than you are able to buy. But the second thing is also, and this kind of feeds into the second factor, is when the pandemic hit, there was massive vaccine nationalism. So depending on where the supplier is based, certain governments passed policies that did not allow the supplier to continue exporting their raw materials and instead forced them to only give those raw materials to companies located regionally, for instance. So having more than one supplier is just incredibly important. It also makes you resilient to supply chain shocks, which happened often during COVID-19 pandemics, just because we had to reboot our supply chains. We weren't used to functioning within lockdowns. So just because geopolitical crises like the Suez Canal problem kept hitting during that time. The second and similar reasons for that is you need to have, as far as possible, domestic and regional sourcing, just because that is the kind of sourcing that your government has the most amount of capacity over. And so they probably are able to redirect that sourcing to vaccine manufacturers faster than if you depend on international sourcing for raw materials. It is also obviously true that not all raw materials are going to present domestically or regionally. So this is not possible all the time. But for the raw materials that are there, even if they're slightly lower quality but pass the quality check, it may make more sense to source them domestically or regionally than internationally. The third is stockpiling capacity. The thing with stockpiling capacity is, it is actually very financially difficult for firms to develop stockpiling capacity. And the reason for that is very simple, right? There's a lot of cost to developing stockpiling capacity. The vast majority of ingredients you need for vaccines have very limited shelf times, so they won't be able to, continue being stockpiled for more than 6 months often. You don't know what you're stockpiling for, so you can't keep stockpiling random raw materials in different times. And there's also a lot of legal risks to stockpiling raw materials, primarily because at least what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is if firms unnecessarily stockpiled materials, they were prone to being sued because they were stockpiling what were materials that were important to save lives and not necessarily using them because they don't really have a clear projection of what demand might look like. So when we're measuring stockpiling capacity, especially from a pandemic prevention perspective, it needs to be not about what their existing inventories are. So not about looking into how many glass vials do they have, how many raw materials they have, but rather their ability to stockpile in general. Are they able to maintain the temperatures that we need to stockpile for larger bases? Do they have the technology that you need? And so that's what the measurement needs to focus on rather than just the specific raw materials. That was the first factor when it comes to scaling vaccine manufacturing. The second most important factor in terms of ranking on importance is access to technology. There's three things that access to technology can be measured in terms of and probably should be measured in terms of. First is access to currently proven successful technology like the mRNA technology and the adjuvant technology. For just a little bit of context, adjuvant technology is a technology which allows you to increase the efficacy of a single dose. That is to say, the single dose becomes much more stronger. And so from that one dose, you can extract 2 to 3 doses. You don't necessarily have to change the scientific production of the dose to do that. So that's adjuvant technology. mRNA technology is just platform technology that was able to develop. For instance, we know most COVID-19 vaccines were mRNA based, and it's just easier to develop them. And they, while perhaps not, they have a limited effect in that while they won't change the fact that you could still get COVID, they would change the fact that you're much less likely to be like die because of COVID. Like it is much more likely to be fatal. It is much less likely to be fatal or have like very dire effects on you. So those are two very successful technology that we currently know. mRNA vaccines can be produced for most viral vaccines. And as a result, a lot of the technology that we would have for producing mRNA vaccines can apply to many different pandemics in the very first place. The second thing is modular technology. And the idea here is when I showed you what the vaccine manufacturing process looks like, not all firms need to specialize in end-to-end production. That's to say, not all 3 things need to happen at the same time. You can break that down into separate processes, and because of the fact that you're able to benefit from labor specialization, you're able to produce on a larger capacity if different firms do different parts of the upstream or downstream processes. So for instance, and this is often much more likely to happen in middle income and low income countries, while they might not be able to do the clinical research, they do have fill and finish capacity. And as a result, they take the load of larger vaccine manufacturing firms who can focus on one thing and they can do the second thing. And generally, if the biological agent is known, we know how to produce the vaccines. And I want to note this is probably the most likely pandemic, just because one, statistically, the most likely next pandemic is to be an influenza pandemic. And the second is, even if not, we currently have a lot of government efforts to profile existing pathogens, and the chances of a pandemic being from those existing pathogens list is very likely. So the chances are we won't be very surprised by what the next pandemic is, and we'll probably have an understanding of how to solve it. So the key bottleneck then is not the clinical research part of it, but rather the fill and finish technology, because you know how to make the solution, you just now need to be able to scale it and send it to people on the ground. So having modular technology would be very useful. The last thing is flexibility of manufacturing platforms to adoption of new technology. And the key thing is, especially what I learned after my expert interviews, is there are ways to create technology that is flexible. So for instance, one, multi-purpose facilities that allow you to transition between vaccine manufacturing and general drug manufacturing. That's to say you could use the same technology for drug manufacturing during peacetime and then shift it to vaccine manufacturing during pandemic time. While this technology exists and we probably have the capacity to do this, this is not something that has been scaled. And this is not something that has been put to the exact usage of shifting between drugs to vaccines. It has been generally being applied to shifting from one drug to another, even though it would be applicable to vaccines as well. So scaling that. And second is standardized manufacturing practices. The main thing here is if we depend upon technology transfers as solutions, it's hard to do technology transfers if like your manufacturing practices aren't standard. So if, for instance, your technology or your factories are using different types of regulations, different types of machines in the first place, it is much harder to collaborate across regions. It is much harder for the WHO to organize you getting scientists from different regions, just because they won't know how to use your technology. So you need to standardize manufacturing practices as far as possible. This is, of course, as we established, should be very hard. So access to technology, unlike raw material capacity, needs to be something that is prepared for before the pandemic as far as possible. And this is going to be something that will take probably years to develop rather than just like something you could do in the pandemic. Once the pandemic starts, we don't have much ability to change between technology. We got to work with what we already have. The third factor is manufacturing capacity. So just in terms of how many doses can you produce, how many machines do you have? There's three things you can measure manufacturing capacity in terms of. First is ever-born manufacturing capacity. That is to say you have production lines that you only partially use. And so as soon as the pandemic hits, you're not only able to produce as much as you were currently producing, but you're able to scale it more rapidly than during peacetime, just because you have some production lines that don't have to, face the time constraint of shifting from one drug to another. They were just maintained and kept partially used, so they can immediately start producing vaccines. The problem with this is financially infeasible. No company has any incentive to maintain a partially utilized facility. If you have a facility, you're probably likely to use it. It is possible for governments to support doing this. However, what happens with political discourse is when we're in peacetime, as in we're not close to a pandemic, governments don't often see very clear impacts of maintaining partially utilized production lines. This seems like distant. This seems like we don't really know if a pandemic will hit or not. So they are generally more likely to redirect that into scaling some form of production. So unfortunately, the thing that is probably the most useful is the least likely to actually happen. What then can we do? One is obviously we can expand routine vaccine manufacturing capacity. If you have larger firms right now, you're able to produce more vaccines during the pandemic. You can often measure this in terms of numbers of doses produced right now, but you have to be careful about the kinds of technology you're using to produce those doses. There can be limited flexibility, but the multi-purpose facility that I talked about before can be very useful. And the third is contract manufacturing integration. That's to say, if you have many partnerships and operational integration with contract manufacturing organizations, you're able to much more rapidly scale vaccine manufacturing just because you're able to outsource parts of the production process much quicker. And if those partnerships already exist and there's inbuilt trust and like financial systems and supply chains, that is not time being wasted during a pandemic. That is just generally much more quick to adapt in the first place. Another thing to note is that it is not important to have capacity in general, but rather maintained and used capacity. And the reason for that is what happened is, especially in the early 2000s, when vaccine manufacturing was a technology that we learned how to scale, more and more countries were trying to build this. There was more funding from developmental organizations, especially US aid, to build such kind of facilities. However, they have not been maintained. They are essentially empty factories right now. These are not factories that can be used during a pandemic. One, because they don't have workers. And so getting the skilled workforce that is necessary takes months or even years to identify, and you won't be able to do that during a pandemic. But second, they aren't built in the way that you need for regulation. So that is to say, you don't have the quality checks inbuilt, and setting up those systems that you would only set up if you are currently producing vaccines is very hard to do in that case. Cool. And then the final factor that I identified is some parts of organizational capacity. First is obviously you need a skilled workforce and you need trained personnel with expertise in vaccine manufacturing. It is okay to some extent if they don't know exactly the kind of vaccine manufacturing they might need for pandemics, but they need to have the foundational skills and the ability to adapt very quickly to whatever vaccine manufacturing firms. So in general, it is good for your skilled trained personnel to have a diversified experience portfolio and just experience with different types of vaccines in the first place. Second, and this was very important during the COVID-19 pandemic, firms need to have commercialization experience. If you're very good at producing a vaccine, and even if you can scale that on large, if you don't produce for a commercial market during peacetime, one, you wouldn't know how to strike those partnerships, you wouldn't know how to handle the high costs of producing for pandemics, and you just generally wouldn't know how to scale and deliver those vaccines. You don't have those cold chains developed. So you need to have commercialization experience, especially during peacetime. And the last thing is quality management system maturing. That is to say, you need to have as much regulatory harmonization as possible. You need to have established quality systems that are able to function somewhat independently and with a understanding of how the linear processes work when it comes to supporting regulatory compliance. So is just generally, it should not be that you're establishing systems for regulatory compliance from the ground up during a pandemic, but rather it like depend upon established systems. Cool. So what happened? Those were existing preliminary findings. I'll be continuing the research with Dr. Lisa even after I go back to the campus in Boston. And the hope is to convert this into an academic paper. I am in the process of scheduling further interviews, especially interviews that give me some more information outside of the ASEAN context. So I would particularly like to learn more about the developing country context. And I guess another thing is just we want to apply the framework we're talking about and measure existing firms on the basis of that framework and see what exactly capacity, especially in the developing world, currently looks like. Yeah, and then first of all, so much gratitude to the IBER team. Dr. Lisa isn't here, but thank you so much to Dr. Lisa for supervising me on like this research. Her expertise has been incredibly invaluable. I didn't know that I would specialize in vaccine manufacturing before coming here. And since then, I feel like I've learned so much, talked to amazing people in the field, and it's all because of Dr. Lisa. So thank you. Chania and Devina, thank you so much for organizing everything, taking us around. It has been a lovely experience. And generally, thank you to everyone in the IBER team who has, met with us, talked to us, given us their insights on things. So thank you so much. And just to give you some bit of understanding of what I and what we as the interns have been up to in Indonesia. Canopy students, thank you so much. We went to Bogor, we went to Kota Tua, many places. It was also a pretty lovely experience. We heard your thoughts about Indonesia, especially learned a lot about the education system and higher education in Indonesia and how that works and how that perhaps differs from US and in my context, Asia. We also talked a lot about social mobility, so I feel like these experiences were pretty invaluable, and I wouldn't have gotten that without interacting with you guys. So thank you so much. We were also at the IRSA conference, and we saw Ramco. I think that was pretty useful just because a lot of my experience seems to be around Jakarta and with neighboring regions. And it seems like development is very different outside of Jakarta. So going to another place was very important, and we saw very few elephants. That was lovely. And navigating Jakarta, I am now using Grab bikes, and I seem to be good at using them. So seems like I've gotten much better at navigating the country, navigating the city, eaten many new fruits that I hadn't eaten before coming to Indonesia, and saw many animals and aquariums in the city. And I guess just some reflections on my time in Indonesia. First, I didn't realize how unique development looks in this country, just because of the fact that it is the world's largest archipelago today. And geography makes things so much different, especially when it comes to how do you reach remote populations, how do you make sure that they're also benefiting from development. It seems like most of Indonesia's economic growth is Java-centric, not Jakarta-centric. And I guess one of my regrets is I think we should have gone outside of Java a lot more often, but it's okay. The second thing is, and this is from, I guess, interacting with a lot of people who've been working in international organizations or regional organizations. It seems like there's an understanding that we want to cooperate regionally, we want to build better international networks. It is, however, also true that governments are reluctant to work on their promises just because of concerns of sovereignty, especially during a pandemic. It seems like we obviously have to focus on your population first, but that means that you compromise regional ties, and effective cooperation often depends on one state taking like leadership at the coordinating role, and most governments are reluctant to do that. So it seems like even though regional cooperation would generally be the most efficient way to go, even when it comes to vaccine manufacturing, but generally even with like structural transformation, it is hard to establish. And I've learned about a lot of other topics: the history of Indonesia, education, healthcare, social protection schemes, target giving, structural transformation. Generally been a pretty amazing experience.
Wow, give it a love for that's interesting reason of it. Absolutely good luck for the SAR things and anything else. Before that, who's okay? Hannah, okay, you had a question or maybe suggestion? Okay, that's fine. Maybe we can keep in touch with Hannah, that's not for you. Because everybody's, thank you so much, Muhera. See you later. Okay, so I think now for the discussion, we are opening for the discussion. Oh, Muhera, anyway, I think someone is Muyati. Yeah. All right. Is there any question or discussion comment for our friend Tisha here? Okay,
Okay,
Yeah.
based on your findings of some of the determinants that are related to sourcing. You said that, there's one place in Chile that has a specific, factor that's needed in manufacturing. I think intuitively, it would be pretty hard to, try and see or like predict whether a national government can try and change something about their, monopoly structure, competitiveness on the market for those kinds of companies. But do you think there's any, international organization with sufficient capabilities to try and develop some sort of framework for future, I'm not sure, like plan or strategy, seeing that more and more pandemics have become some sort of issue or central, thing of importance to a lot of countries.
So, and I discussed this with both of my experts that I interview. When it comes to firms that have monopolies over certain raw materials, unfortunately, there's not much you can do. There are international organizations, so obviously there's WHO, there are some vaccine specific ones like Gavi and Sydney. The issue is they have extremely limited capacity. One, because they actually don't have that much funding and they depend upon national governments cooperating with them for funding. Which, and this kind of affects the second reason, during a pandemic, it is actually during a pandemic that governments care the least about international cooperation. Just because you are facing such strong electoral pressures from your own population to look after yourself. So unfortunately, currently there is no existing framework. And both the experts I talked to weren't particularly optimistic about what developing anytime in the future. I think perhaps the way to go with this is just as far as possible find technological alternatives and see if other things work, other forms of technology work. It is also, I think, somewhat useful to know that even for the same pathogen, there are different ways of producing vaccines. And so certain forms of vaccines are much less likely to depend upon sourcing that raw material, even they're less effective. So it seems like, yes, the most effective way to handle this is technological transition, but yeah.
All right, is there any other question or?
Hello, Disha. Thank you for the presentation. I can say that this is my first time to heard about some health economics research design and agriculture something. And maybe I have two questions that I want to from. The first one is this research that we want to do is focused only on COVID pandemic, or you will focus on other pandemic also, like maybe yeah, other pandemic, maybe like SARS or something like that. And the second question is there any second question is uh what's the definition of successful vaccine manufacturing that you want to take this research? Is that like the time period of manufacturing process, or like the numbers of the vaccine produced for a certain time period? I just want to make sure that is that like any international standards that people are used to measure this different approach in different countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. On the first question, my research is focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the most data is there from COVID-19 pandemic, and most of the literature, most of the experts have experiences from the COVID-19 pandemic. So it seems like a lot of the insights I get are unfortunately specific to COVID-19. And then I have to take the second step of generalizing them to what could be a unknown biological agent. I will say, however, there are learnings from COVID-19 that can be generalized, that can apply to other vaccines, because we weren't at all prepared for the COVID-19 vaccine. So there's much to learn. I think another thing I want to do going forward is moving on from just general pandemics, but looking at regional epidemics and seeing how countries navigate those. Just because there's something that I think could be classified. With regards to the second thing, which is what the definition of successful vaccine manufacturing would be. There is no internationally agreed upon definition for conduct. There is no framework for whatever the WHO sets about, just because vaccine manufacturing seems to be less of a focus. There's an understanding that we want vaccine manufacturing more decentralized, i.e. it should be in more middle-income countries and in more low-income countries, and not just in certain regions of the world. But that's often where the conversation revolves on an international basis. But I think for me, what a successful vaccine manufacturing context would look like would be, one, it would be decentralized. So there would be more vaccine manufacturing firms in middle-income and low-income countries than currently exist. Second, they would have the ability to produce vaccines at much faster rates than we currently had after the COVID-19 pandemic. That's to say, once we discover the vaccine, there shouldn't be too much of an adaptation period just for the manufacturing to happen. And third, they're able to produce large numbers of vaccine, enough for, to some extent, cater to the demand that we have. So we felt really short of the demand we have. And to some extent, that is also because COVID-19 vaccines require 2 doses. So even if we could cumulatively produce enough for the world's population, we weren't at all prepared to create 2 doses for COVID-19. So kind of also just for being flexible to unknown biological agents, and knowing that there might be manufacturing processes that would change during a pandemic depending on the pathogen, but we would still have the ability to adapt to it.
Much more educational feedback answer. If anyone wants to ask or add some comment about this asset research, please. I love the way you are trying to ask preparation for the rules. So I think I hope you also have treated for the last time. All right, please.
Okay, so I think I noticed from the manufacturing is that as I said, there's no incentives for the manufacturer, like their capacity or like inconvenience in general. So I think there's like market failure here. So do you think I'm just curious about do you know any government expenses to
to help the manufacturer to get to improve their capacity, their technology, whether it's Indonesia or other countries.
So the main reason why manufacturers don't want to expand manufacturing capacity is primarily financial. It takes a lot of money and capital, and they don't really know what returns they might get. This is also specific to vaccine manufacturing because vaccines, according to international and global commitments, should be cheaper than $1. And that really changes the kind of financial risk analysis that these firms have because there's not that many benefits to producing vaccines. So the most useful government intervention is taking some of those costs over. So one, state-owned companies, apart from, so there's obviously some of the really large companies like Pfizer, etc. But for middle income and low income countries, state-owned companies tend to do better than just financial, or private companies, because the state is able to bear some of the costs and the state sets the priorities for them rather than just like the shareholder perspective. But the second thing is if governments or the WHO or any international organization is able to give them the funding to maintain certain things, they'd generally be more than happy to do it. However, to some extent, we don't have enough money or we don't care enough politically about this to put the money into these problems. So it's a little unclear if governments are likely to do it. But when they have done it in the past, it has worked. One very interesting thing is the WHO and this organization called Gavi. They're coming up with innovative financing mechanisms that are much more likely to let companies do this even at low cost. And the way they're doing that is one, making clearer demand forecasts. So they're telling companies in the case of the pandemic, this is exactly how much demand you'll face. And this is exactly how much we are willing to price your vaccines for. So you already know going in the profits you could make. And then the situation looks more certain. Companies are more willing to invest in this. So there's some unique and interesting things happening in this space, but there's a lot more to be done.
Is there any question or comment? Thank you. Please. Nah, ini klik di slide. Di bawah. Yes, yes.
No, thank you for the presentation. So first of all, I will ask you a simple question like, now, the issue of the solution for this problem is to respect the investigation, right? First of all, as we know, Indonesia is an interesting case because it's different with another country in Southeast Asia. We have Thousand Island, and it will make out of the in this solution. If you want to decentralization, and like maybe assembly inventory or another things, what step we prioritize to do this, and cause what if maybe because the technology in that state or maybe the population and other things. Just for me, thank you.
So this is specific to vaccine manufacturing or generally?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Is your question specific to vaccine manufacturing? So what should the state do for decentralized vaccine manufacturing or in general?
I think in general, because like maybe to predict the future, like discuss like the COVID-19, I think Indonesia need to prepare not only the self-defense only for the military, but the healthy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm questioning like, if we need to, like you said, will manufacturing or something like that, or to save the inventory for the vaccine. What sort of step we progress first, and it may be the very right place to reduce the impact of bottleneck. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. So just for a little bit of context on what Indonesia is currently doing. So Biopharma is the main vaccine manufacturer, and they're present only in like they're factories are only there in Bangkok. They're not very decentralized with other factories are. And generally most production is happening there. And second, biopharma doesn't handle delivery into different regions. The government handles it. So I think in terms of things that could help, however, is one, Indonesia is very, very rich in a lot of minerals and a lot of raw materials. However, they're all handled by different companies or different state-owned enterprises, and the links between them aren't made as clear as they should be. So once again, and we realized this when talking to the Ministry of Finance, some of the raw materials that we needed for COVID-19 vaccines were actually produced in Indonesia, but it took them 2 to 3 months to realize that they would be produced by a company in Indonesia, just because we didn't know. And that's because we're not categorizing it as this is something that could also be used in vaccine manufacturing. They're just producing that raw material generally. So having clear understandings of in each region, something new is being produced, something different is happening, and they could all come together to help us with COVID-19 or vaccine manufacturing, just making it clearer in terms of information and tracking those and trying to create links between those could be very helpful. And the second thing is, I think there are some unique regional challenges, of course, with vaccines. So your religion often changes what ingredients can be used in vaccines. In Indonesia, all like vaccine manufacturing ingredients should be halal, which adds a unique challenge to creating those vaccines. So just understanding what is likely to cause anti-vaccine ideology in different regions and thinking and trying to make the vaccine more generally applicable to different regions, I think could be useful. And that seems to be primarily, I think, a Ministry of Health project that should happen.
Okay, maybe we can have like 2 or 3 minutes left for this discussion. Does anyone want to have like voice? No. So yeah. Do you want to ask something? No? Okay, so thank you so much, Tisha, for your time. Can we have a cloud for Tisha? Regarding the topic about sales, I really hope that your research will be more novel in the future. Okay, one more time, give a big applause for Tisha. Hi, Tisha, thank you so much for your time. And now, maybe without further ado, we will jump into the last but not least presenter. It's already here. Be prepared for present something also interesting. Mirai, the time record is yours. Give a applause for Mirai. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Mirai, and I'm presenting on skills mismatch in Indonesia, specifically looking at the Sukarno data set. Okay, yeah, first, I want to say a big thank you to IBER, to Tanya, Devna, and to my supervisor, Hanmi. None of this would have been possible without them, and I really appreciate being able to not only do this program, but also explore Indonesia and learn so much about the culture, just from a lot of informal conversations. Same to Kanapi, thank you so much for all the time you put into making this a really fulfilling experience. Okay, so I'm looking at labor, specifically because my supervisor is a labor economist and I'm giving this economist data set. So I go through a couple of iterations in terms of the project I'm looking at. And the first iteration that I did for a few weeks in the beginning of the summer was on the gig economy. So first looking at the gig economy, gig workers are, there's kind of different definitions, but are typically understood as workers who are in short-term contract systems. So they often are not classified as formal employees, which means they're also not given many of the labor protections that is typically required for a full-time employee, which means informal workers in Indonesia are classified as partners that all have a central platform that they are doing their independent contracting work. But this is really just a circumvention around the law and means that they don't have the same protections that a full-time worker would have, even if they're working the same number of hours. There's a few demographics that are typical of rideshare drivers. They are typically male, concentrated in cities, and have lower university graduation rates. And like I was saying before, there's very minimal social protection. So not only do they not have the job security, they could be fired at any time, but they also don't have a retirement fund, they don't have pensions, they also don't have things like collective bargaining because of this legal circumvention. They aren't classified as formal employees, which means they don't have access to a lot of these things. In addition to sort of your general understandings of social protections, there's also no transparency. There's a common complaint from rideshare drivers that they are start on the app, they get a certain amount of money, and then over time they get less and less rides, they get less and less income, and there's really nobody to report this to because they were never guaranteed a specific amount of money every day, a specific number of rides, and the amount of money they are getting changes a lot day to day, and there's really nothing they can do about this, which makes it a very precarious environment. There's also not a lot of upward mobility. There aren't many training courses or things in Indonesia they can do. When they start as a rideshare driver, they want to sort of move up the food chain and sort of a dead end path, which makes it even more precarious. In terms of international solutions, obviously there are rideshare drivers all around the world. A few things people have done to try and reduce the precarity. One is being reclassified as employees. I think it's the most obvious. Kind of recognize them for the, if they're actually working full time, recognize them as employees and kind of mandate social protections. And there's also been cases in Singapore where they're given different training certifications they can do so they can move up a sort of hierarchy, still within the rideshare space, but it allows for some sort of career mobility and ability to achieve a greater quality of life over time. So the reason I was looking into gig economy in the first place was because of the current relevance. So recently, the presidential regulation was passed that has changed the platform commission. So it used to be when a rideshare driver would give somebody a ride, 20% of that would get taken by the company, so by Gojek or Grab or whoever is facilitating whatever platform. But it was recently capped at 8%, which is a pretty substantial change. There were some concerns that when this was implemented in July of 2026, this would impact pricing, but we haven't seen any huge shocks so far. So it seems like this has been largely good for the rideshare driving community. This presidential regulation also mandated BPJS insurance. So rideshare workers now need to enroll in this insurance, which means some amount of money needs to get paid to it every year, but they do get access. Another reason I chose this topic was because of the ILO convention that happened recently that encouraged platform economy protections. There were a lot of people from Indonesia in this space that said they would look into it for their own country, which is what made this a really interesting and timely topic. The reason I ultimately did not use this as my final research question is because of limitations of Sukarno's data. So there's no Sukarno's data to directly identify who is a gig worker. The closest I found in terms of a literature review of what other people were doing to approximate how many gig workers there were was looking at all self-employed service workers that use the internet, sometimes using the internet as a marketplace, if that's a question that's available, which it is in some versions of Sukarno's. The problem with this is there is a large gap between online-based gig economy workers and location-based. So ones that are using a platform that are rideshare drivers, they're still doing all the work in person compared to something like online tutoring through Essential platform. Obviously, these are very different groups, and it's difficult to separate the two just given the limitations of Sukarno's data set, which is why there's estimates ranging from 430K to 7 million rideshare drivers. The platforms themselves estimate about 800,000 drivers, but it's just really difficult to tell who's actually a driver when looking at the Sukarno's metadata set. So looking at iteration 2 of this project, I then turned to the National Internship Program as something that is also very timely and very relevant to the kind of state of labor protections and the labor economy. So the National Internship Program, as many of you probably know, was rolled out first in October of 2025, and a second wave has just been rolled out for June 2026. This is a very large-scale program, has batches with over 150,000 applicants, and so far they're reporting modestly positive. There's 30% conversion from those internships into full-time employment, which is the ultimate goal of this program in the first place, and trying to kind of combat these phenomenons of educated unemployment. So interns in this program receive a regionally adjusted minimum wage. So a lot of it is funded by the government, not by the firm, which makes it a lot easier for these firms to pallet. And they're also given Social Security and a certificate upon completion. So looking at how this translates to the Sukarno's data set. The internship data, obviously, since the National Internship Program was rolled out in October 2025, and the most recent data I had access to was in August of 2025. It's not able to directly estimate the effects of this internship program. However, a potential proxy is through the PKL program, which is a more compulsory fieldwork program a lot of students have to do before graduation. It's one of their graduation requirements, but it is fieldwork experience. Obviously, the huge problem with this is if it's mandatory, it is difficult to see the impact of the education versus the impact of the education plus the internship, because everyone is doing the internship, so there's no clear control group. But we can look at some of the results anyway. In terms of regressions, we see that people who did not complete the internship program within the last year actually earn more than people who did. This is most likely because of the minimum wage that all interns are receiving, so it's not particularly revolutionary for us. We also don't see any difference in wages when we can control for graduation years. So on average, we aren't able to see an impact of whether or not you've done this internship and if it has translated to more or less wages. The same thing is true with formal contracts. There's about the same number of people, or about the same percentages and breakdowns of people who did the internship versus didn't and had either formal or informal employment. Okay, so finally, the third iteration is the research question I finally land on, which is how can Indonesia optimize training programs in order to address skills mismatch and accelerate national development? There's a couple of reasons I choose this question. One is because it is still very relevant to the national internship program, but can be more specifically studied through Sukarno's data using the national vocational training program. So as you can see on the screen, there's these are the two questions that are very relevant in measuring the training programs. There's about 225 training options that you can select for what you did and put that into your Sukarno's data set. Which means we have very specific and very robust data regarding trainings rather than internships. This is also obviously very relevant to the work I was doing previously on gig economy workers. Gig economy workers could benefit a lot from these training programs, given that there's not a lot of upward mobility within that career path. And it also allows me to look at broader national development, investigate how premature deindustrialization can be connected or mitigated by these training programs. Okay, so first we're looking at skills mismatch, one from the supply side of workers and one from the demand side of firms. So first looking at the supply side, there is very high youth unemployment and high educated unemployment in Indonesia. Young people spend approximately 20 months after undergrad looking for work, and this is longer for women, people in urban spaces, and vocational workers. So even though there's kind of common knowledge, if you want to get a job quickly, you should go into a vocational training school, that actually isn't always the case. Which makes this a really serious problem, as it's not just impacting people looking for extremely prestigious jobs, but people that are entering the labor market from all different facets or all different aspects of life. Another thing we see a lot is credential inflation. So many people have undergraduate degrees now, it's become basically the bare minimum. This is because even if it's a job that doesn't require the knowledge of an undergraduate degree, when someone has one versus when someone doesn't, the person with an undergraduate degree is seen as more trainable, more likely to be competent. And this means that basically everyone has to get a degree, but they aren't getting the same returns you would have seen 10 or 20 years ago. Something a lot of young people are falling into as well is that in these very high skill industries, they don't have formal training, they don't have enough previous experience to break into the industry, which makes it very difficult, and which is a big part of why the skills mismatch exists. And finally, we see vertical mismatch. So 36% of youth are not working in jobs that are equal to their level of education. So they're either under or overeducated for their job. And there's also very low youth entrepreneurship, which many development studies say is very important to developing the economy of the country. In terms of the demand side, we see that overall there have been a lot of layoffs due to regulatory uncertainty, slowing global demand, a shrinking manufacturing sector, as well as a lot of jobless economic growth. So even in the industries that are gaining in wealth, they are not ones that have high requirements for the amount of people actually working, which means that there is a lot of growth on paper, but we aren't seeing that reflected in the amount of jobs that are actually available. There are some emerging economic opportunities that are more labor intensive. One is the green economy. The government estimates this could provide 3.8 million jobs. There's also some employment to be seen in downstreaming as well as in digital technology. So people with digital skills being able to do that sort of work. And finally, I'll just highlight that special economic zones and national strategic projects in Indonesia are another potential opportunity demanding high skilled labor, and that are also very relevant to structural transformation. Okay, so what is the government doing right now in terms of addressing the skills mismatch? The government is doing a lot. First is the National Vocational Training Program 2026. So they are targeting 270,000 participants, and they have a lot of community training centers that people can apply to go to. Specifically, it's targeted for people leaving high school or leaving undergraduate. Trainees receive food, transport, insurance, and certificates. So it's supposed to be something that you can kind of easily walk into and a good transition from school to your career. There's also partnerships that are happening earlier. So at the high school level, local enterprises are doing little teaching factories where they collaborate with the high school. They form some kind of revenue stream and it gives people real world experience of how running a business actually goes. There's also a lot of trainings offered in the National Vocational Training Program. So this ranges from agriculture, construction, food and beverage technologies. It's a very wide variety of the trainings that the government is saying will be available to the public. And finally, we have the pre-employment card program, which has proven to help people with digital upskilling and help people to be more productive in the jobs they're doing, but does not have clear effects on if it's actually creating more jobs. So each person may be more productive, that's not necessarily translate into the sector expanding or more jobs being created. One thing to note though is despite all of the initiatives the government is doing right now, in 2022, when similar training programs were rolled out, only around 60% of graduates were actually absorbed into the labor market afterwards, which kind of makes us think what is happening to that 40%, and if we need to have more specific training targets and standardization. Okay, so looking at training, this is more specifically analyzing the data set. We see some things that are, I think, somewhat predictable. There's a positive correlation between if you've completed a training in your life and if you have higher quality workplace. So if you've completed a training, you're more likely to be formally employed, you're more likely to have higher wages, and you're more likely to have typical workplace benefits like leave, insurance, safety. Obviously, this is a two-way street. It's not just because when you have a training, you are then more easy to employ and more high skilled. It's also likely because when people are selected to receive training, they are already ones that were more employable because these training questions do not differentiate between if you were trained at a training center or if you were trained in-house. So if you received a job, you received a high quality job, and then they trained you right on the spot, which means that there's going to be a lot of overlap between the two. So obviously, if you're more trained, you're more likely to have a higher quality job. If you have a higher quality job, you're more likely to get more training. In terms of training participation rates, women are slightly more likely to be engaged in training. It is slightly more common in rural areas, and the higher level of education you have, the more likely it is to complete one of these trainings. Okay, in terms of the trainings that you're actually seeing dominated as of August 2025, these are the top 10 most popular training courses. So you can't read it, the top one is office administration. Then we have health work, job training methodology, management, finance, and it continues down. So I think there's a lot of conclusions that can be drawn from this, but likely needs more, more like investigation to see if these are actually accurate. I think one potential conclusion to be drawn from these top 10 most popular training courses is that workers are really concentrated on developing generalist corporate skills. So instead of seeing people trying to do something specifically entrepreneurial, specifically innovative in the emerging green sector, we see people are trying to diversify and make sure they can get a job anywhere, which means they need things like office administration and management skills. We can see this as potentially a result of the lack of relevant and specific jobs in things like research and development, entrepreneurship, and the green economy. So people are developing these skills not because they're most passionate about office administration, but because there are not jobs in more specific sectors, so they're trying to diversify and be as employable anywhere as possible. Another thing we can draw from this is that people with advanced degrees are potentially reskilling. So from some sort of informational interviews I've done, people have talked a lot about people that get engineering degrees and then end up in consulting and banking a couple of years later. So this could be a lifestyle choice. People want to move into those banking or consulting jobs, but it could also be a result of kind of a forced vertical mismatch. So the positions that would align with their degree are simply not available, so people have to become more general, become more interested in business or general office positions. So a couple of conclusions you could draw from this, but obviously nothing that is definitive. So in terms of the final product of what I've been working on throughout the summer, this is going to be a more media-centered or like popular-facing briefing. So these are the 4 parts that I will be putting into my briefing. The first is an overview of skills mismatch, an overview of major labor supply and demand issues. The second part will be looking more into training demographics, so seeing what kinds of training are most popular based on region, based on education level, gender, and age. I've started to do this, but want to look more closely at why there's, for example, a small gender gap in likelihood of doing training. So I want to investigate that further. I'm also going to attempt to do a deep dive on specifically manufacturing, so people who have manufacturing jobs, and seeing what trainings they've done in the past or what trainings they've done in the past couple of years to see if there's any trends there, given that manufacturing is shrinking, but still a huge part of the economy. And finally, compiling recommendations based on my findings, as well as other training systems abroad. Okay, some reflections from this process that will also be continuing to inform my work as I continue this after this program is over. First is data constraints. So obviously I went through multiple iterations of what I was studying. I think this has taught me a lot about how to form research questions that can be most easily answered by a specific data set. I've also looked at context-specific trends. So what I was describing before, people having an engineering degree and then choosing to go into consulting or banking is a skills mismatch on paper, but it isn't necessarily negative. I think it's very dependent on if it would have been more productive for the economy if they stayed an engineer, or if it's actually not, doesn't need to be qualified as a negative or a bad thing. Another thing I've learned is that social protection and industry are very closely tied. So I originally came to Indonesia being very interested in the social protection side, seeing for marginalized communities, how the government can provide them with direct resources. But ultimately, I learned in Indonesia, it's also very important to have opportunities that can actually be sustainable and ensure they're not just dependent on government subsidies. So seeing how employment is very important for social protection instead of being continually stuck on government welfare and government assistance. And then finally, looking at data and being able to form a coherent story based on informational interviews and getting a really good understanding of what the economy actually looks like, because I think there can be a big gap between data and story to tell, and it really is dependent on making sure you're accurately informed about the country. Okay, besides doing this project, here are some things that I was up to in Jakarta. So I was able to contact a lot of people who were either connected to Harvard or connected to Harvard journalism because I'm on the student newspaper. So I was able to talk to some people who are more on the academic side of things. So a professor at Princeton who specializes in Indonesia and did political consulting in Indonesia for a few years, as well as a lecturer who's also a Papuan activist. In addition to the more academic side, there's also a lot of people that are actively in the field. So I was able to talk to journalists like Andreas Harsono, as well as Irman Faiz, who's a lead economist at one of the large banks, as well as people from international organizations or international facing organizations like the UN Industrial Development Organization and Ministry of Foreign Affairs diplomats. So a few more people that I was able to talk to while being here, and I think being able to talk to people and seeing all the different ways they're approaching development is very valuable to my own potential career in development. One was understanding that genuine development requires a lot of time, a lot of coordination, and a lot of government capacity over time. There's no one development career. I think I've begun to understand more that has a 100% impact that can be done immediately. All these things are reliant on creating sustainable systems over time. A lot of people I talked to also said that the shutdown of US aid and COVID has proven development needs to get more agile and needs to get faster and cannot be dependent on only one source of funding. Finally, I think what I've learned, especially in talking to people who work at nonprofits, like the past Indonesian Heritage Society chair, stable financing is oftentimes really the bedrock of any community-based initiative being successful. So finance doesn't have to be sort of a one-way path to making the rich richer, but it's really important on every single level of social protection. And yeah, these are a few more things we were doing in Jakarta. I think we've already talked about some levels, but yeah.
All right. You have been close for nearly for interesting also a topic before I get to our question, maybe it's a very interesting for me also it's a question like a small bit. You are seeing from the perspective from the supply side. No, it's a more complex than supply demand side from this topic, like from how to say apa nih lupa pelatihan itu kan apa dia lagi bahas apa kelas apa training, yeah. So I mean you are seeing from the supply side of the training and also like the benefit from the work of the latter things. But now I have a curiosity. Have you ever wondered is from the demand side? So I mean from us who's like looking for a job. So my question is a simple like this. Have you ever captured or come to your mind? Is there any like how to say a trait for the demander to approaching the class of training? Because somehow people maybe in Indonesia, I don't know, I still not seeing from the statistic yet, but I think people in Indonesia somehow with low education is not actively looking for a knowledge, not actively looking for a class of training. That's why maybe they are not able to join the class training. And of course, they are will be very hard to, have a job in a battery. I mean, I prefer try to capture also for the women's side because I think it's also something cultural things because you already talked to maybe from the Papua activities or something that from Eastern. Is there any something that maybe become a threat for the people, maybe in the rural area? Like as we know that sometimes the class learning is not inclusive. Have you ever like yeah? I really want to know your maybe your finding or maybe your thought. Listening.
Yeah, I think it's very understandable. I think there definitely are a lot of factors that impact whether somebody is even approaching these training programs in the first place. I think a general one is it's kind of understandable for people to be disillusioned over time of seeing these training programs rolled out year after year and then not really seeing a huge change in their daily lives or in the daily lives of people who did the trainings. It is somewhat common. As I said, in 2022, only 60% of people who did trainings actually entered the formal labor market after that. So I think it is understandable people do not want to approach it in the first place. I think there are also a lot of cultural barriers. So I think that people's understanding of development looks very different. I think people, especially in regions that have maybe difficult histories with the government, are more skeptical of government-led programs and don't believe development looks like changing their way of life, changing their culture, changing kind of the rituals of their day-to-day. So I think all these things are valid concerns. I think it's ultimately up to each person to decide if they want to engage in the training or not. I think from the government perspective, the best they can do is just make sure that all these training programs are as culturally competent as possible. So making sure that they don't feel unnecessarily foreign to people who maybe do not have a lot of experience interacting with the government in the past. But yeah, I think that there definitely is still a lot of demand for training. For both of the national internship programs, they've gotten way more applicants than they can accept. So I think that it's not a program that needs to be abandoned, but definitely things to consider, yeah.
That's a really good point, perspective also from the answer. I mean, because out of your answer, I just pop on in my mind, there are two things. First, yeah, in some culture, they are close-minded, even in the research of Hitisha, also, Katya, we also find some close-minded, yeah, the way of thinking of people in Indonesia. But the second one is, I think all of the problem for this, your presentation, like from the government perspective, they always try to yeah, of course, marketing in the program, but the second one is giving the incentives. And incentive is just like of amount of money. I don't know yet. Is there any like maybe another how to say a good policy that maybe boost their participation rate? But maybe now is the time to open the discuss. Is there anyone with question? I have a question or maybe comment? Please. Or do you want to have? Okay, please. I'll this.
I guess my question is, how much do you think higher education is preparing people for employment? Like, do you think there's some training that's kind of within the higher education curriculum, or is there a dependence on having separate training programs either by the government or by companies themselves?
Yeah, I would say definitely kind of across the board, even though there is a problem with educated unemployment, the more education you have, the more likely you are to find employment, the more likely you are to be prepared, even overeducated for the job you're going to do. And as I was saying earlier, even if you're doing a job that's not at all related to things you studied, just having that degree is kind of a signaling that you are competent, you are easily trainable. So I think that there's really no harm in getting education. I think it maybe is not having the same kind of effects on your employment as it would have 20 years ago, but there's still large positive effects from education. I think for people that are going into higher education, there's not necessarily a need for like very rudimentary training. I think that there are some trainings that can maybe be implemented within the higher education system, but I think some very much are. For example, digital skills, the ability to use office technology like Excel. I think a lot of those things are things to also learn in undergrad and are things that you maybe don't need a separate training for, especially if you have a very relevant major like computer science. So I think that there definitely is a lot to be gained still from higher education. It just has become that so many people have those skills. It's really a competition for jobs rather than just a competition of who has the best education.
Thank you. Isabel, oh yes.
You had a graph at some point that had the industries in which trainings were likely to be offered. If I'm correct, there's administrative policy, right? I wonder whether there's some sort of selectiveness factor in these training trainings being offered and whether that's an obstacle, on the labor demand side. And then that self-reinforce itself so that people, if people don't seek out trainings because it was a selective process, then there are less trainings being offered because there's not as much demand. Do you think that could be something that you could consider in your research, or what have you found?
Yeah, I think that there definitely is a lot of potential for that to be the case. So I guess my understanding is that, yes, if there are, like, for example, office management or finance positions that have a lot of trainings offered, but it's only for people who are already very qualified, training just becomes another kind of, another like thing that you have to be able to break into. So if the problem does start before the trainings have ever happened, I think that is definitely, that's definitely probably a very realistic possibility. I think in terms of solving that issue, I think the only real thing to do is to help people be qualified enough for those trainings, which means investing in younger levels of education. I think we see very similar things in the United States. For example, by the time we get to the undergraduate level, there's already been a huge difference based on what high school, middle school, elementary school you went to. So I think that in terms of actually solving that problem of some trainings being very exclusive, I think the only thing to do is to help people be more qualified, or to create specific training programs that are centered around people like looking for, or centered around people that maybe have less experience or are less competitive in those applicant pools. So I think that's also something to consider. I think that could definitely happen regionally if there's areas where people typically have less experience, making sure we have training programs go there. I think that kind of thing would definitely make sense. But yes, I think that's a very valid concern.
Anyone want to add about political figure? Any from this side? Or maybe have you have participated some offline, how to say, the training program? Have you ever participated in a training program? But again, official or informal or unofficial. Even I know that everyone also have a training program, right? Yeah, anything else? Do you want to share something? Please.
Okay, well, personally, I've never exactly participated in a formal training program. From like a campus organization, I have participated in those training programs, but not exactly ones with certification. Though I do agree that training programs could be a solution towards the problem that we are facing right now in Indonesia, especially with how big that the economy really is. However, there is something that I would like to note is that unfortunately, the problem is not just about upskilling or just on the accessibility of such upskilling. It's a lot of it has to do with
You mean like the availability of jobs in the first place? Those are like having jobs available in the first place for people to go to.
Oh yeah, having jobs available in the first place because it's like a big reason on how the gig economy is going in Indonesia is that because like the formal sector is like there's too many supply of workers for such a limited demand for jobs in the demand of workers in the formal sector. And so, yeah, what you get is that these overqualified people that are in the working in the economy as like online drivers for like a very good childhood and to other jobs as well. And upskilling them would maybe they could land them like with new jobs. I mean, typically they would have like their entrepreneurial skills, maybe a better life for them. But in a lot of cases, like yeah, it's certainly a way to see it, but not the only way to see it because because of the current condition, even if you upskill yourself when there isn't exactly enough demand for you out there, it's gonna be a problem. And yeah, I can't really say much from on experience because I have not really worked a lot in my life in these kind of things. So I know from what I'm looking for. Thank you.
I think that your perspective is definitely something I've heard, in talking to a lot of people in Indonesia. A lot of people are very skeptical of the internship program. They feel that it's just 6 months of employment and then you get tossed back into like the job market where nobody actually is able to hire you for full-time employment. So I think that's definitely, a very valid concern. And I think that, one thing I was considering is that, in measuring these training programs, it's not necessarily just to see if the training programs themselves are very effective, but training could also be an indirect way of seeing that skills mismatch in the first place. So the fact that people with engineering degrees are getting trained in finance, maybe doesn't mean that the next thing to do is create as many finance opportunities as possible, but rather that we see because they have to get the trainings in the first place, the labor they wanted to provide or the specific service they wanted to provide was not something they could do given the job market. But yes, I think definitely, especially when I remember when we went to the National Economic Council, this is something they also echoed that, like the national internship program is a nice start and it makes people feel good kind of momentarily, but the most amount of funding and research and time should go into actually developing a job market that can support more people. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
Thank you so much, Mary. I think we still have like 3 to get, sorry, 2, 3. Let's say 3 to 5 minutes. Does anyone want to have one? Please.
For the question, I was, wasn't well for it, so I might not, I don't capture all the full image, but, what I would ask is there like any, from your findings, of course, maybe have you have found something here in Indonesia, or maybe like from the neighboring countries, in the siblings, yeah, what you call it, yeah, yeah, you understand, yeah. So from your major findings, is there like, some comparison on which case is it still is mismatch in Indonesia is really like something big of a deal? And then what are the like the structural problems or like and how do they deal with them specifically? Because I do think that skill mismatch in Indonesia has been going for quite some time. So to control this to neutralize the problem. What would you say would be the your suggestion of the best solution? Maybe, thank you.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely something I want to look more into. I don't know if I've seen a lot from neighboring countries yet. I think that initially I was asked to like find US kind of based comparisons to see best practices, but I think the US doesn't really have this sort of training ecosystem, or at least not as government funded. So I think that it definitely is like less of a question about training programs at all and just kind of the broader question of how do we create more jobs. I think kind of similar to like questions Pate was looking at, how do we create more jobs? How do we ensure that money in education, because education has been going up and up, how do we ensure that that actually translates into more employment? I think that that's not a question I can answer right now, but I think that definitely is the more important question.
Thank you.
Anyone from Kerala here?
More this like next time, I think that the current problem is not all only in Indonesia but also in the US. So I just found that given the graduates come from the Harvard or the Columbia have the time there as well. So my question is maybe more about the research itself. What extent that you want to I don't know, advance this what you have on in this research, like what research here that you want to focus in the future. Maybe that's my
Yeah, I think it's definitely echoing the US as well. There's a very common anxiety that people aren't going to be able to find a job after graduation, even if they're graduating from top schools. I think in terms of addressing this issue, it probably does move away from training programs and more from, I guess, expanding different industries. I think this can come from kind of like general, like finding a sector that the country can specialize in, so they can develop more of a comparative advantage. I think those types of things are kind of just general solutions to being able to sort of fix the fact that there aren't enough jobs to go around in the first place. I think something happening in the US as well is that recruiting timelines just keep getting moved up further and further, which makes it difficult for people not only to find a job that is best for them, which then creates labor inefficiencies, but also just means that it's becoming so competitive that it makes it a lot harder for people that are maybe trying to break in from underrepresented backgrounds and marginalized communities. So yes, I think that all these things definitely need to be addressed. I think in terms of equalizing this already competitive field, I think there are programs that can be done, maybe training programs can be done specifically for marginalized communities. I think in terms of being able to eliminate how competitive it is because there aren't enough jobs, I think that is just a broader question of how do we create more jobs in the labor market. But yeah, very much echoing the US.
I think we will run out of time, but I can give one, I would say, chance to questions. Does anyone have a question for me? Or do you want to have a follow-up question? Well, I think the interesting part is that this comes from you also, like, I mean, you're comparing Indonesia to how to say the US. I mean, I was graduated from, Netherlands and like, I got a scholarship from the national government, right? And then like, in my batch, in my school, there are 19 students. I'm only one to get a job in the Netherlands. And then like 18 of us also wants to have that kind of chance, but we should go home. And yeah, I mean, yeah, because of the law of the LPDP scholarship, we went to home. Long story short, in the first month, no one get a job in Jakarta, Indonesia, and also in the other part. And I was asking, I was questioning. I mean, in Indonesia, the mismatch is like higher education is not. Let's say menjamin, yeah, like yeah. What's menjamin in English? Guarantee. Guarantee. That's a good thing. Thank you for the project. Thank you for having. That's something is popping up in my mind. Yeah, there's not guarantee for all of the, like things. So I mean, based on her research, also like now, even I mean, she's mentioning about the training. I have a formal degree, even it's more than the average Indonesian student or student. So there's like a X question or like a big question mark that maybe is not in her research. But now yeah, we know that technology factor, one model that mentioned in technology factor, did you remember this? As an economics student? Apa dia faktor yang ada teknologinya apa sih? Teori apa? Siapa? Bu? Kamu mention ini coba. A plus A kali ini. Kayak on plus calculus with the technology, right? So I mean, previous year, calculus maybe already captured that moment, and now it's getting how to say real. It's getting real, and because the AI and anything else that makes more efficient for the working ecosystem that may be boosting the how to say the competitive sector. Maybe do you have any like and how to say closing statement before we end your presentation? Oh, okay. One more, yeah, okay. Please.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Maybe I just want to ask, like, you mentioned that the average of undergraduate student that get the job after they graduate, like 20 months or something like that. Yeah, I just want to ask, like, based on your like research review or research or some readings, like, what's the ideal time of period that the undergraduate student should get the job after they graduate from their universities? Because yeah, I would say that a lot of people, including me, are really concerned about this type of situation in Indonesia. Not only every student, I think all of the students in Indonesia, and yeah, this these case is I think it's very important if we have like some standards that we can pursue, like maybe if the ideal type of period is like 6 months. Yeah, so I will granting in the 6 months after I graduate to get a job, something like that. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think like in terms of people's personal ideal, I think if you can get a job as soon as you graduate, obviously that's going to be best for the labor market, also best for you to have the highest income possible. Which I think is also a reason people tend to do trainings like office management or go into very conventional, safe, reliable careers like consulting or banking, because you can often get that starting recruiting as a second year, and then you have a job waiting for you when you graduate. So I think that, yes, I think obviously the ideal is that you get a job as soon as you graduate. You don't have to have this kind of uncertain or waiting period. I think in the US, the average amount of time between undergraduate and employment is about 6 months. So I think that is something that is realistic and able that could be strived towards. I think that, yeah, in terms of my personal experience, there are a lot of people who graduate from schools of all levels and just don't have jobs for a long amount of time. I think this is also particularly for people that have very niche interests, maybe want to go to grad school and are just very like and they don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of the career they're actually looking for. I think those people tend to struggle more in terms of finding jobs as quickly as possible. But yeah, I think it is realistic to strive for around 6 months, because I know that's where the US is at, and even many people in the US are not happy about it. But yeah, I think closing that gap is definitely something that would not only be good for the economy, but good for every individual.
All right. I think that's the last question that we have today. And thank you, Mary, for such a great presentation also. Let's give applause for Mary. Thank you, Mama, for the presentation. And we also hope that you have like a bush of the future good business. I like Nova. And because this is the last presenter that we have today, can we get a big applause for 3 of them who's also already on their presentation well advanced. Alright, so maybe today the event's already done. We would like to say thank you for CID of Harvard for let us to become a host in Indonesia, for IBER to become a host for this year. We really have wish to have a future collaboration in the next year or maybe the next period. We would like to say also thank you for all the supervisor, Ms. Shona Samira, Ms. Mr. Muggo, and also Mr. Handri, who's already well done to supervise 3 of them. And we would like to say thank you also for all of the either BOD and also all of the founders. We would like to meet you online and offline in the next event. And thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah,
We have some gifts
Oh.
for everyone. Okay, that's not all.
This is so nice of you. Shall I edit the Zoom first?
Up to you.
Or do you want to have it on me? I think we can edit that. Thank you so much.